That's good.
Let's go ahead and get started.
Yep, 5 minutes in, so let's go. Thank you everybody for joining us. I know it's been, to put it lightly, an eventful week with the release coming out. We've heard a lot of feedback. We've been kind of sorting through all of that, and we'll be discussing all those things. Not only today, but in the coming weeks. I think we'll probably have some ongoing discussions about some of everybody's feedback, but I do think it's important for everybody to know that feedback is being heard, it's being considered. Feedback that proposes solutions to problems or suggestions is especially helpful. Also really want to thank everybody for your contributions to this release. I believe we had 130 contributors, so it was awesome to see everybody come together and work on that. Thank you for that. We have a bit of an agenda, but first I want to do some housekeeping, just a handful of upcoming events. We do have SaltConf EU coming up in June, and the call for speakers for that is open. So if you're interested in speaking on something Salt, DevOps, SecOps related, DM me for topic suggestions, propose your talks. We'd love to see, a handful of new faces speaking. And then we are going to be hosting a SaltStack meetup in Los Angeles in February. That's going to be, in March, and that's going to be Tom talking about our products. There will be dinner and just a chance for everybody to kind of meet together in person. So as we start to get work or meetups up and running. And then finally, I have a couple updates on the work groups. The networking work group is not going to meet in March. We're looking at, we need a new captain for it and some other logistics. So we will put that on hold for March and then hopefully pick it back up in April. We do have documentation work group starting in February, and then I don't know that it'll turn into a work group, but there was a loose suggestion of making a triage work group, but that's something that's in early stages. So if that would happen, I will let you all know. That's all I have, kind of community housekeeping, events. Anybody else have any community type events to add? General updates? All right. In that case, what?
Sorry, Cassandra, I was also going to say that for one of the things that got raised in the community channels is there's been an ask for us to share where we will be, at the various events, for example, at KubeCon or RSA or so on and so forth. So we will be publishing and sharing some of those dates. So if anybody happens to be at those events, we'd love to connect, with one of the SALT team members, etc. That'll be a wonderful opportunity. So we will be publishing that particular schedule. So thanks for those who suggested it and asked for it.
Yeah, and I've been announcing those in the work or in these open hours as well. So you have a couple different outlets to find out who's speaking where. Oh, the other thing is we've had a request to have kind of an open agenda, shared document that people can go and view the agenda for these open hours. Gonna work on getting something in place so that everybody can know what to expect prior to these meetings. And in an ideal world, those will be published on like Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning. So you'll have a good 24 hours to see what the agenda will be. And then if you think there's something that we should add, let me know. But like many things, it's a work in process, so I appreciate your patience with all of that. Today, kind of main topics we want to cover, talk about the Neon release, talk about, there was a blog published that had a quick summary that also links to some more detailed things, and potentially touch on a couple other topics. But I think here I'm going to turn it over to the core team to talk about the release.
Okay, so do we want to discuss the symlinking issues that came up in community Slack? David Murphy, do you want to discuss about the plan for those?
Yeah. Are we mute?
No, I unmuted you.
Okay.
No, we can hear you, David.
I think
Double dip. Somebody else hit the unmute on the speaker as I was playing with the control panel. So essentially, we're going to go back and put in a major version for the web landing page, similar to what we had for 2018.3 and 2019.2. so that there will be a symlink. It's actually a symlink on the machine, so that it will pick off the latest 3000 being the latest. But if there's a 3000.1, we'll symlink into it, so that when you hit on the web landing page 3000, you'll get 3000.1. If there's a 3000.2, you'll get a 3000.2. Just like you have with the major version being 2019.2, and it symlinks into the latest version of that branch. We'll add that back today or tomorrow. It should appear, depending on people's workflows, reviews of document changes, etc. But then it'll just be a case of making sure that everything looks good and then putting it up. If the problem is more in making sure we have our documentation correct than it is in actually doing it.
Okay, and there were some questions about Red Hat OpenStill. Do we want to take feedback on that?
The Red Hat OpenStill?
About the links that we're doing for Red Hat or not doing.
On the major versions for the Red Hat and Amazon family, at the moment there is install repos which exist for a major branch, for example, like 2018.3 or 2019.2. Given that in the old versioning format, there could be many changes to a major branch, many minor releases of a major branch. For example, if I take 2015.8, there was a minor .8, .9, .10, and up. So that won't be occurring in the future. Hopefully there will only be a patch to a branch if there's some major issues or quickly we need to fix something, or CVE of course. So there isn't we're proposing not to create the install RPMs for the Red Hat and Amazon families that you have at the moment. Otherwise we'll be creating one for each whole number rollout. But we'll provide the details similar to the minor version for how you have to create and access the symlink. It's just basically a cut and paste into a file in etc yum.repos.d. So it's pretty much a case of cut and paste and yum make cache to pick off the new versions.
Right, that makes sense. So yeah, if there is any feedback on that, we're
we'll still have an install RPM for latest, because that'll always pick off whatever is the most recent release of default, which is handy for a large number of people, and we don't have to change it because it'll just be picking off whatever is the latest that's there on the web servers. So that essentially never has to change unless we fix something or have to add something, like when you change our keys or something like that, and have that happen. But otherwise, it should be pretty straightforward.
okay.
As I said, it's more a case of making sure our landing page documentation is correct than actually creating the symlinks.
Right, right. So I know that there was also some discussion about the general concept of us moving to 3000 versus the old way of doing it. And I would just like to sort of go over again, like our reasoning and why we made the change and what we feel that we're what benefits we're getting from the change. So basically, this all comes back to us trying to get into a state of more stable releases and more predictable releases. It started in mid last year when we started stabilizing the test suite, and with the amount of work that it took to get the test suite stable for a 2019 2.1 branch. After going through that process, we decided that the easiest way and potentially the only way that we would keep a stable branch moving forward was to move to this sort of single branch model. Combined with the fact that we wanted to get into a position where we can be predictable about all of our releases. So instead of doing we hope we'll get a yearly release out, but it might be 13, 14, 15 months, to every 4 months we're delivering a release and we're delivering it on time, and it's predictable. That led us to this discussion of, hey, we're making all these major changes, so let's change the way we do versioning, because it's going to be every 4 months. The date thing didn't seem to make as much sense anymore. So we decided on this 3,000 numbering scheme. There's been a lot of questions around like what is different, and basically the main thing that's different is we are trying to get to a position where we're just working off the master branch as much as possible. It doesn't mean that we're not doing bug fix releases. We're still doing bug fix releases. For the most part, we're going to try to make those bug fix releases happen in a timely fashion after a major release, so that we can still work off master. If we get into a situation where we run into a CV or something like that, where it's a critical fix that's happening well after we've done a major release, then we can still create a branch for that release. We can still make the changes there, make it a bug fix only release, so it's not including any features. The only difference in our process for that is, instead of doing a merge forward like we did in the past, we're just going to be applying the fixes to both places. Then when the release is out, we'll go ahead and remove that branch, the old branch that's not master. And so there's no temptation for people to try to merge things to those branches. So hopefully that kind of clarifies where we're at with 3,000. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Yeah, feel free to voice any questions or post them in the chat. As a reminder, there is a SEP, of course, out there with a lot of details that goes through the elements. Please don't assume that just because there is a SEP that we are assuming that everybody will just get it. That's why we have these open hours and the Slack channels and communications around making sure that we clarify as we go along. I do appreciate, Max Arnold posted one comment that this is a strategic bet we're making, as Diwa said, on following a best practice that we've seen with other open source projects, getting down to making sure that master is always stable, always green, always running, building off of that. But at the same time, of course, preserving the integrity of having a dot release that addresses issues, bugs only, fixes, CVEs, regressions. So, Diwaz, I appreciate you reminding all of us of the objective here, and of course, encourage everybody, if you have a question or need some clarity, to please engage with us as we continue to improve here. I will highlight that I just got a DM, with folks saying that, the SEP channel only does have 40 plus folks, which is actually accurate. And so we can do a better job around communicating that. So for the community as a whole, if you are on Slack, and we all recognize that Slack has its strength and has its limitations, please always be on the watch out for the announcement channel. That's exactly where we post things that affect everybody, and we have 5,000 folks or 4,000 folks there. We will continue to use the subtopics like SEP, etc., but we will do a better job in maybe drawing your attention to the things that matter, because it's easy for some of these things to get lost. The DM does continue to actually suggest that we need to pay a little bit closer attention as well to the SALT forums. So that's something Cassandra and I can take as an action item here, because that is fair. Forums are places where things last. They're easier to search. conversations are not disconnected where you have to feel like you're hunting for them or having to repeat yourself. So we will take up the SALT forum back again as a place to also make sure that the broader community knows of those changes, and that we're able to not just write them down, but verbalize them for all of us to be on the same page.
Sounds good, Mo. So another thing that came up in the community Slack after we did the release is people pointing out that they still have pull requests that either are sitting there pending to be merged, or potentially there are pull requests that were merged to branches like develop, which we're no longer using. We are tracking all of those pull requests that need to get in and need to get ported. We actually have a project board on GitHub, which is helping us track those. So I would just like to point out that we're definitely aware that we still are working on those. We still have resources dedicated to making sure that they will get merged and that things that need to get ported will get ported, and we're tracking the process. There's also some pull requests currently open against other branches other than master, and so we are working through getting those ported over as well. Just one thing to point out, like as we have just done a release, we are right now working on any bug fixes and regressions that come in. After we get a point release out, then we'll continue back working on feature pull requests and these ports that we need to get merged.
So Diwaz, just to play back what you said to make sure that we cover the PR point. So if a PR has been reviewed, if it has test and passing and so on, we obviously expect that those will just get merged per the process that we have laid out. And then, of course, the second element of PRs is that we have PRs that we need to port. We ported about 140 of them in Neon, and so we should expect that we will take a whole bunch of chunk and continue to work on porting those as we get into Sodium. And of course, thank you for all of those who did actually step in and help us create tests or help us create port some of these PRs. Again, a shout out to all of them as a thank you. And if you would like to help us by looking at some of your own PRs and moving them, then we absolutely would love that. It will only just speed up the process for all of us. And I think we've published, if I'm not mistaken, a list of the PRs that we've already ported and the next wave of PRs that we have in the backlog. And if not, then I think, Sage, we can just put a link to that again for the community to see. That will be wonderful, just to give everybody transparency on that.
Sure thing.
Definitely. Is there any feedback on that? Does anyone want to comment? All right. So lastly, I would just like to sort of go over some of the major highlights from the SALT 3000 release. Of course, we had many pull requests, as Mo pointed out, that were ported from other branches. That process is well on its way. But we also had some features making in as well. We had some major improvements to the LGPO module. The speed of the LGPO module is now, I think, probably 10x or more faster than it was. It's now in a state where we have consistent runtimes instead of runtimes that increase with the amount of checks that you're running or the amount of times that you're calling into the LGPO module, which was a sort of a design flaw that we addressed there. We ended up vendoring Tornado, which means we included the Tornado 4.5.3 code base in with SALT. What this allows us to do is continue to provide packages for newer operating systems that are no longer shipping older versions of Tornado. So some operating systems have moved to version 5 and version 6, and then the older operating systems, some of them don't have version 5 and version 6 packages. So by vendoring Tornado, we get a consistent version for us to run off of, and then this will facilitate our upgrading of Tornado to 5 and beyond, because we'll have a consistent version. We won't have to support the old and the new. So that's a nice improvement, and I believe that'll speed up the changes that we're making to upgrade Tornado. We had some changes to the unless and only if statements in state modules. That means that users can operate the unless and if only requisites with SALT modules. Execution modules run through only if and unless can now support modules with arguments. So the change there is basically that the unless and only if requisites had some limitations previously that we've addressed. We have shipped native minion support for network devices. This is a huge one. So basically, in the past, if you wanted to configure switches, routers, things of that nature with SALT, you would use a proxy minion. And moving forward, we're getting these native minions, which means that on devices such as Arista devices, you can actually run a minion directly on the switch, which is pretty awesome. It's not just Arista. We're working with Cisco and many other vendors to get native minion support on those as well. There was also some cloud, SALT Cloud enhancements, new support for Tencent Cloud, some AWS Systems Manager support, and also we added the ability to manage Microsoft Azure DNS. So those are sort of some of the highlights from 3000. There was, of course, a lot more work done, but those are some of the big ones. Of course, we have to be grateful, and we're very thankful to all the community members for their participation and help in getting the release out. So that's sort of all I have for SALT 3000. Do you have any feedback?
Thank you for that, Diwaz. I think it might be appropriate to transition to talk about 3000.1. And I know there's a couple of questions that came up from various community members around that. So I think it's safe to summarize that as Diwaz and Cassandra shared earlier, there's been a number of issues that have come through. Obviously, trying to create a .1 is focused on critical issues, CVEs, etc., but also elements of what we would consider regression. So the team is really all working through those that are coming in, and we will be publishing out back the issues that are going to be addressed, etc. Megan, I think you may have an example of one that you may want to just share with the team as an example of one that's been highlighted. I know why we don't necessarily actually support the notion of an older master having to support a newer minion. We view that as something that we're going to go ahead and treat as a regression and support. Maybe you can elaborate on some of the background on that one.
Yeah, so there was a new feature added to mine.git well, just the mine in general, so that you could specify in your mine functions, specifically if you want to allow a specific target or slash minion. And in that new feature, it actually changed the data structure that is being sent back to the master. And if you're using a master that's less than 3,000, it doesn't know how to parse that data structure. And so this essentially, like Mo said, does not allow mine.get to work with a new old master with a new minion. And so I'm working on a fix that will only send that data structure if you're using the new feature, because then you assume that you want to use 3,000, and I'll add to the docs that if you want to use that feature, your master has to be on that same version as well. So is that one.
Thank you. And I think, Gareth, you're working on another one related to MySQL.
Yeah, so we had an issue that got reported that unfortunately we didn't catch before the release, related to the MySQL modules. So we are addressing that. It looks like it was a change that we made regarding arguments getting passed around and ending up in the MySQL module. So that should be, it's a relatively simple fix, and it should make it into the .1 release. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I posted this in community Slack as well as for anyone that happens to see it on Twitter. One of the issues that long-running issues that we've had with the MySQL module has to do with a somewhat recent change that MySQL themselves made around password management. So they moved to, rather than like just the basic MySQL native password, which was just an MD5 sum at the password, they've moved to a more secure SHA-256 hashed password, which is good from a security perspective, but bad from a password management perspective, because they've taken away all the tools. So if anyone from the community has any suggestions going forward of how to manage that, because it kind of breaks managing users in MySQL, please hit me up on community Slack, and we can have a discussion about that.
Thank you, Gareth. So I think, team, it's safe to say that we're working towards a 3000.1. We are highlighting, a sample of some of the issues that the team are working through. As a few of us have highlighted, again, thank you to all of you who are raising those issues, but also helping us fix them. One of the things that Sage is helping us draw upon is to share out milestones for when 3000.1 will should be expected, and how that, of course, translates into Sodium and the timelines around that. So as we get into next week on Thursday, we will be able to share a little bit more of the issues that we've been able to wrestle down, commit to, and get into a 3000.1. So look forward to that, and look forward to sharing those data with you. Any questions on 3000.1? Okay, I think, Cassandra, it's back to you. Are there any other issues folks have highlighted, or topics that folks wanted to talk about that we need to address, or should we open for Q&A? Or
that kind of covers the main, because I went through and I read a lot of the conversation, the release in general, and have been kind of aggregating things, but I think we've covered most everything. Let me double check my notes.
Yeah, and I'm looking through that again. Oh, actually, you're right, to just look through the others. Christian McHugh actually raised the question about talking about, GitLab. There's been some talk about that. We're actually lining up that discussion for next Thursday. Just to clarify for everybody, we're not moving, Salt to GitLab. We're not moving away from GitHub. So just make sure that that is clear out there. And of course, what we're doing with GitLab and how are we using it, we can go through more of those details on next Thursday's discussion. So feel free to join us next Thursday for that exciting topic. That was one, Cassandra. There are others you see?
I know that there's some talk about we want a better process around triage, but that's something that's just a conversation that's going to happen. That conversation just started this morning. So we will at some point in one of the next few open hours probably talk a little bit more about the triage process and ways that we can potentially improve that and make it better and make sure things aren't slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, and I think that it probably needs a lot more time and dedication. Yes. And so we want to give that to everyone. We also need to have some probably come to Jesus meetings internally and make sure we know what we're doing and everybody's on the same page. And so we do need to give some dedicated time internally to do that as well. And then we want to make sure that we're dedicating our own resources there as well, because that's not going to help if we don't do that first.
Oh, and it looks like we have some questions from people who are on the call. Do you want me to take those, Mo, or share them?
Are those in the community Slack?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think, let me just check. I think Carol, you're with us here. So I don't know if you want to just vocalize the question you had or the comments you have, and then we can find the right folks to address them.
And just, this is exactly the type of thing that we want out of these open hours. Is it's a good time for a Q&A, it's a good time for conversation, it's a good time to sit and talk with us directly. And over time, the hope would be that more and more community members are doing more of the speaking and leading discussions in this meeting.
Guys, it was a question regarding the open versus enterprise, right?
Yes, that was the question.
Yeah, so basically the question is the same. So there is some puzzling comment regarding Salt core team won't be implement some feature regarding the scaling of Syndic. And I thought it's a bit strange because it's like feels there is some, how to say, like marketing thing going on, because like there is enterprise solution which kind of supports the scaling and looks like open solution does not support. So it's kind of okay, but from my point of view, it should be clarified somewhere. So like if you want more than specific amount of minions, you probably should go to the enterprise or something like this, because right now it doesn't state anywhere. So that's just a thing. I just wanted to know if like what's the Salt policy regarding this.
So unfortunately, I don't have any specific numbers to say like what the minion or the Syndic can support. What I can say is that basically what that statement is saying is that the Syndic itself is just architecturally not up to the task of very, very large numbers. It is a way to scale, to help scale Salt, but there are just basic architectural limitations to it. And I believe that the enterprise offering is working on sort of more holistic solutions to scale. I definitely agree that we should be able to say how many minions, what that looks like, and we do have efforts to as we move forward do more testing around performance and getting more solid numbers of like how many minions do we support and what sorts of configurations. That's something that we have a team working on in the next couple months. So although we don't have those numbers now, I expect that at some point we will have those numbers.
Yeah, I think that was spot on. Tom, you walked in at the right time to this discussion. Carol just actually brought up a good point around Syndic. So I don't know if you have some additional thoughts or points you want to add to Diwaz's answer.
Yeah, I mean, the only things that I would add is that, like Diwaz was saying, Syndic is a very limited way to scale command and control of infrastructure. When we go back and we look at most of our large-scale deployments, most of them have opted out of using Syndic, and we discovered that that really where the Syndic architecture has most of its challenges, actually, ironically, ends up being just hitting the limit of how fast you can pipe data through a Unix socket. Really, we ended up with one of these situations where one of the core assumptions around SALT scalability that helps a master scale as well as it does, still just falls down when we get to numbers. Typically, it falls down between 20 and 30,000 on that master system. And like Waz is saying, at that point, from a large scale perspective, we really need something more robust than Syndic, because Syndic is really just message forwarding and repurposing a minion connection architecture. It's far too lightweight for what those actual large scale needs are. So unfortunately, that comment that was referenced on that GitHub issue was probably seen more as us saying, hey, this is an enterprise feature, and less of us saying, the actual ways in which we can solve this on an open source perspective end up getting incredibly complicated, and the Syndic architecture just isn't up to that task.
Yeah, so I think, Tom, the key here is we are going to look at this, investigate to see if there are other ways, to your point, or those complications and so on, because I think it'll be worthwhile to share some of your insights with the team members as to whether it's possible or not, or so on. But more importantly, I think is the second side as well, or equally important, sorry, Carl, which don't want what Diwaz mentioned to get lost. We actually have had new team members join us. One day you'll get to join them. One of them is called Don. He had managed many performance, large-scale environments and so on, and he's working around creating that explicit guidance. So there is a lot of, tell me what's the right configuration, what's the right scale metrics, how should I plan for it, etc. And so look forward to that in the next, month or two. But certainly by June, we hope to have published a lot of that, but maybe something sooner than that. Does that answer your question, Carl?
Yes, thank you.
No, that's great. And I think you had another one about code quality.
Well, yeah, it's more about like if Salt team actually up to refactoring some old states, because years of appending new features makes it all.
Yeah. Gareth, I think you've been looking at this. Oh, sorry, Tom. Maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Welcome to, but the kind of the intro comment that I can make is, we have a number of states, and I think that you mentioned the archive state in particular, which is a very, very well-used state. We have a number of states that have fallen into what is a pretty common software engineering challenge. Is that we're in a situation where we've got a fair amount of feature crept code, right? And so there are a number of places where we do need to do some refactoring. And while we can look at things from a one-off perspective, I would really like to get to the perspective where we can try and take some broader reaching efforts to solve those issues. I don't feel as though I'm ready to be super aggressive about what some of my assumptions around that are on this call. But I do agree, and there are a number of areas like the one that you pointed out. Yeah, so I'll hand that over to Gareth if he had a more robust and direct answer.
No, that was pretty much word for word what I was going to say, and just like build on that. There's a number of states currently that, exactly as Tom said, like as time has gone on, they've because the nature of states is to like keep things simple in terms of number of functions. The functions within those states end up being not so simple. They're trying to do way too much. Basically trying to be like a Swiss Army knife for those particular functions. And so we have identified a number of them. The archive one is one. The file state is another one that just need to go in there and like be broken out into the various pieces to make things a lot more maintainable, but a lot more like simple to use. So yeah, we hear you loud and clear, and we agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, this is definitely not a problem that's unique to us. I should say, I mean, this is a challenge that we've seen in a lot of projects out there, and so again, which is why I want to not only look at things and just say, hey, we need some tidying up, but also more importantly, I do think that we need to come together and try and figure out some ways in which we can prevent these problems, these creeping problems from creeping up yet again, so that we're not like, if I dare use a movie reference, if we're not like Mr. Incredible saying, I just cleaned this mess up, I'm not a maid.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Tom. So Carol, I think one other item, I know Pedro is not with us, and I just checked. I know some of the colleagues who are also part of the testing work group were surfacing and looking at some of the same things as well. They can add some color, but if there are areas that you would love to start to think through in terms of a suggestion for refactoring, etc., surface those. We as a collective team have within our priority not just to try and introduce the next feature and function, but as Tom alluded to, we're also looking back at some core components that we might want to rewrite or refactor. We're approaching that in different ways. Some things we recognize are quite frankly simply need to be redesigned. And other ways, maybe we can sidestep it and leverage new models like POP, etc., to be able to modernize some of those elements. So as you hit a particular pain point or an area, I think we ought to give you a little bit more of a precise answer on that particular area and what we can or how we should be approaching it. So thank you for that, Carl. Really good points. I think if I may just close off, Cassandra, on the ones that I saw listed. So we talked about, I think everybody that, the only one that I did not see is us addressing is one that Mark Smith raised for the consistent issue labeling. And I think we can address that probably next week. So we'll talk about GitLab, we'll talk about the consistent label issue next week. And then we can share with the team an update, of course, on 3000.1. And what's going inside of those. Those are the things I logged from my side. So Cassandra, any others, or please, anybody on the phone, if there's something on top of your mind, questions or thoughts?
Megan, did you have something you wanted to pipe in?
The symlinks that's probably going to be added, actually given midweek next week, because of this is a holiday weekend, not only Valentine's Day on Friday, but Monday is national holiday.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, David. Sorry, I did get a question and I didn't answer it. So yes, we're aiming for Wednesday, Thursday of next week. And David, if I may ask that we document our final position around what we're doing it and post it. So Cassandra, we can put it into the announcements. That would be great. That just goes to the earlier comment that, this has all happened in a chat. Probably somebody who might not listen to this recording or somebody who's not in that particular chat may not know where we ended up. So let's just document what we're going to do and then pump it out in the announcements channel, please. Cassandra. Thank you.
Okay, what all do we want to document?
The decision that we've taken on the symlink and what's the final position that we're going to do. So latest will point here, etc., so that folks know what to, how we're reverting back to what we had.
Okay, cool.
Anything else from the folks on the phone?
Mo, did we want to just briefly mention just our efforts of like the sheer number of PRs that we need to port over to master? Do we want to briefly talk about that or push that to next week?
Maybe you can frame it, Gareth. I think that's a good topic. I think it will draw a lot of interest for next week, but why don't you go ahead and frame it and we can give the team the direction that we're looking at.
Sure. So as I said, like as I'm sure everyone's aware, like we have a lot of PRs that previously either got merged into older branches, developed branch, that need to get moved over to master. So we have a long list. There's a GitHub project that lists all of them, and we have been slowly porting them over. We've tried to automate that process as best as we could, identifying any PRs that can easily be merged in without causing conflicts, and especially ones that have tests. So as the weeks go on, you'll start to see more and more, as we did like the first initial rounds of PRs going into the master branch. When we first created it, there were like 150 something PRs that got created. So you'll start to see more and more of those PRs showing up in GitHub as we kind of work through that issue. If anyone has any particular ones that they had submitted previously that they want to make sure get in sooner, by all means, like help us out and open up those PRs, cherry pick the changes, and if they have tests, the chances of them getting in quicker increases substantially.
Thank you for that, Gareth. And I think we can also cover that again next week. There are certain topics I know that it's always good to remind ourselves of frequently. This is one of them. So we have 8 minutes to go. I don't think we have enough time for our work group leaders to give an update. I think, Cassandra, that was one of the items we had hoped to cover, but maybe we'll also cover that next week. So we'll hear from Nick and from Shane, just to share with the community maybe some of the highlights of the work groups as well, because that was one of the questions that came in here on the Slack channel.
Sounds good.
All right, team, anything else? Maybe we can end with one last announcement, which Rhett had wanted to share. He's not with us, he's on vacation, but we thought we will we'll highlight it. But let's give everybody else a moment if they have anything to add. Cody always has something to add, but he's holding back. Going once. Twice. Ding dong. All right, well, this is the exciting thing I want to share on behalf of Rhett. So folks, you know, being in a community is a hard thing. Many of us work in software companies and software engineering and so on. And frankly speaking, software is a hard craft. Trying to work, you know, within the confines of your own office space in a dedicated fashion with peers has its own challenges. Imagine now trying to do that with a very large community across multiple time zones and so on and so forth. We can only get better and stronger as a community when everybody contributes their thoughts, their ideas, their reservations, their concerns, and we work through all of those constructively and positively. This particular call, I've had many messages. I know several others on the team might have heard it as being, frankly, a great forum. People are coming. You're putting, you know, names faces to the names, you're hearing the voices, you're hearing the rationale. Everybody in this group, the SALT core group, the work group leaders, wakes up every morning with an ambition to make our community one of the greatest to work in and contribute to, and wakes up every morning with the hope that we can continue to deliver enterprise-grade solutions that everybody can rely and depend on. So to celebrate many of these open hours, and we've collapsed the office hours with the open hours, and we brought those together. Everybody that attends the office hours, and we have, the folks, log name, we're gonna pick your names, we're gonna add you into a raffle, and at the end, we're gonna actually give a free ticket to SaltConf Amsterdam or SaltConf US, based on the preference. So we're gonna do one drawing in May. By then, we would have probably had, I don't know, about 10 of those office hours. So we thank everybody who's coming to those office hours. Sending in their thoughts and ideas, having a healthy and constructive debate. It just makes us stronger. And as a gratitude, Rhett has offered that we will do a raffle and you'll get free entry to the conference. So that was my last thing to share, Cassandra.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And a way to say thank you for, the people who are attending these open hours, the people who are bringing their ideas, the people who are making suggestions. We appreciate that, and that's how we get better, and that's how we make sure that the products fulfill your needs. So definitely keep suggestions coming. We can't fix everything overnight, but I think that we're making good progress. We're getting into a good cadence where issues are being heard, concerns are being heard, and they're being addressed to the best of our ability. And I think that'll just get to be a smoother process going forward. So thank you, everybody.
Woohoo!
Is that it? Anybody have any final words or Valentine's Day jokes, I guess? Anything to add? All right, well, I guess we can call the meeting. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and talk to you the next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes.